Welcome and thank you so much for investing your time with us on a Wednesday evening. My name is Caitlin Ottoman and I'm a senior at Mount Pleasant High School and I am the Youth Advisory Committee's student president. I am joined today by Dr. Emma Powell, who is our YAC advisor and a member of the Mount Pleasant Area Community Foundation Board. Additionally, we'd like to recognize that there are several YAC members and advisors listening on today's discussion. Our YAC represents the 4 school systems in Isabella County: Beale City, Mount Pleasant, Sacred Heart, and Shepherd. This panel is part 2 of our multi-part program, Explore Racism in Modern Day America, which started by providing copies and encouraging Isabella County youth to read the book, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. We have an amazing panel to help offer insight and perspective on topics like Black Lives Matter, police brutality, institutional racism, and broad concepts of diversity and inclusion here in Isabella County and across the country. Our goal today is to provide an opportunity for educational conversations and continued awareness of real issues that might be unclear to our young adults in the community. This isn't meant to be a one-size-fits-all answer book to the social injustices we continue to see, hear, and read about. Instead, this panel is designed to capture real ideas and perspectives of our community leaders of color. The YAC would like to encourage the community to listen, engage, and consider ideas that are not your own. And as this recording will live on, it is the YAC's hope that not only today's participants, but our viewers tomorrow and beyond will hear the insights of our panelists, consider the questions, and reflect on their individual opportunity to engage in difficult dialogue. More than anything, the YAC hopes that this message, awareness, concern, and call for change isn't forgotten, but instead each of us remembers our role in demanding change. Alrighty, now I'm just going to introduce each of our panelists. Our first panelist today that we're going to introduce is Alivia Clark, who is 19. She's a graduate of Mount Pleasant High School and she's currently attending Grand Rapids Community College. She's pursuing a double major in clinical psychology and African American studies. Our second panelist is Monica Djietror, and she is a recent Mount Pleasant High School graduate and is currently attending Mid-Michigan Community College. She wants to be a part of this panel as an African American living in America and wants to show the emotions that one can experience while living in a society with deep-seated systemic racism. Australyah Coleman is a senior at Central Michigan University and is graduating this fall with a major in psychology and a minor in political science. And Dr. Vincent E. Mumford is a professor, I am so sorry, and the director of the Sport Management Division at Central Michigan University. He earned a doctorate degree from the University of Delaware and in educational leadership with a specialization in administration and policy. I will now read the first question. In terms of understanding racial difference, what is something you wish that was universally understood that just does not seem to be so? And I'm gonna pan this first to Monica.
Thank you, Caitlin. I believe that just because you're Black, it does not mean that you fit the mold that society has given a lot of Black individuals. For example, there are some jokes that are made within the community that others feel as if they have right to participate in. And many of these jokes are a coping mechanism that a lot of individuals in the Black community have created to feel closer to one another. So some jokes that could talk about race, for example, or vernacular does not mean that other people outside any race are welcome to join in for that. So I wish that was something that more people were a little more understanding of.
Thank you so much for your statement. And now I'm going to open the floor to anyone else who would like to respond to that question.
I just wanted to say, I think that's a good point. I think that's something a lot of people don't realize is that there are things that maybe we feel comfortable saying to each other or things that we feel comfortable identifying as that aren't okay for everybody to just freely say or try to say to me in like a comforting tone, because it's not comforting when it comes from someone else. So that, like, I completely agree with what Monica said.
Thank you so much, Australyah. If there is no further discussion on this particular prompt, I'll move on to the next one.
I'd just like to add that, something that I wish that everybody, really understood is what people like the recently departed John Lewis talked about, or Dr. Martin Luther King talked about, when he talked about how everything is related. This interrelated structure of reality that if something affects somebody directly, then that same thing affects other people indirectly. We're all one family living on this one neighborhood called Earth, and everything affects everybody else directly or indirectly. I wish that people just realize that about the experiences that we have called humans.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mumford. The next prompt is, some believe that racism is a thing of the past, but do you have any examples of how you or others in your life have experienced racism firsthand? And I'm gonna put this also to Dr. Mumford first.
Okay, the answer is yes. Experienced it in a lot of different ways, directly and indirectly. And that can range from anything like language, where I can remember being in college, like many of you are now, and just walking, the age of innocence being taken away, walking down the street and just hearing someone yell out of the window of their car, saying the N-word, and you realize then that, hey, things are a little different. So language, structural types of things, just lack of opportunities. As I've lived a certain number of years, I can look back and say, well, when I was in school, when I was in high school, my certain friends got opportunities that other friends didn't get, like the kind of jobs that existed in town, existed for some people, not for other people, or even relationships with the police. I mean, I really enjoyed, I have to admit, I didn't read the book, but I did watch the movie. Just, I could relate to almost every experience. Every Black person, every Black man knows what DWB means. Everyone knows what that means, and everyone knows what the talk is. And we've all had the talk, at a young age. So I could relate to that, seeing that in a movie. But I've had the distinct privilege of being pulled over by the police when I was just out for exercise, out walking, and being pulled over by a police car. I'm walking, getting exercise, and they pull me over and say, we got a report that you were chasing a white woman. Well, I walk for exercise just about every day. I still do that today. I try to do 4 miles. But she was a lady that was jogging. I was walking. These things happen. So yes, it's not a thing of the past, and I've experienced it.
I would like to now pan this question over to Olivia.
So yes, racism still exists today. I experienced racism for the first time when I was in 4th grade. I did not know what the N-word was or what it meant. And I was at recess, and I remember these girls started chasing me, and I was so scared because I couldn't understand what they were saying, but they were chasing me. I ran out of my boots that I was wearing, and they were chasing me, and they were calling me the N-word, and I had told my mom. I was crying, even though I didn't know what it meant. And then that's when I finally was sat down, and she talked to me about racism and how it's something that I'm going to experience no matter what. Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing those experiences. Would anyone else like to comment on this particular prompt?
I would like to comment on this.
Absolutely, Monica.
So I have a personal experience to racism, and it is very, very prevalent in today's time. It's definitely not gone. There was an incident that had happened. My mother worked in a home that's not too far from where I live, which is in a predominantly white neighborhood. She was walking in the middle of the road, and a police officer approached her and said, "Ma'am, do you have your ID on you? Do you have anything on you? Where are you going?" And she said, "Oh, officer, I'm just going to work around the corner." Kept asking for ID, proof of employment, a pay stub, a letter, proof of residence. She didn't have any on that. She didn't have any of that on her. So she called my father, and my father biked about 4 or 5 miles because we didn't have a working vehicle at the time. He brought all these documents to her and proved to the officer, "Look, my wife, she works here. We really live in this community. We just live a couple miles away. She's just walking. We just don't have a mode of transport." And my father asked the officer, "Can I ask why you approached my wife?" And the officer told my father and my mother that they had gotten a phone call, and this man said that he saw a Black woman walking down the street, and he had 3 little girls inside his house, and he felt really threatened and uncomfortable that she was walking down the street. My mom wasn't walking on the lawn. She wasn't on anyone's property. She was just making her way to work, something she's done multiple times. And with that, finally, with all the proof, my mother was able to leave, and she was late to work, but thankfully she was safe. And I just remember that experience. That happened just 10 years ago in the same neighborhood that I live in now. So it's just a really big example to show that racism is still happening in our communities right down the street from us. It's happening, and we just need to be aware of it.
You're absolutely right. And thank you so much for sharing that experience. I'm sure that's hard to talk about still, because that's incredibly unfair to your mother, your family, and anyone else who experienced anything similar to that. Australyah, since you are the final panelist, would you also like to share anything, or?
No, I can wait.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity in case. All right, so the next question is, why is race so important for everyone to acknowledge? And Australyah, I'm actually going to pan this to you.
Okay, so this question I feel is kind of difficult to ask because racism and race are both social constructs. Race was essentially created to differentiate between people back in the day. If this was their physical characteristics or their attributions, this is what they were identified as. And it came from like geography or, like I said, bone structures, things like that. So they created words to describe individuals. It's not that we're different as humans, but our physical characteristics are what they were differentiating us with, which essentially created the divide in our society, because this ended up coming down to skin color. So your race was identified by the color of your skin, or the length of your nose, or very minute things that could differentiate you between the majority. So I think it's important to identify people's ethnicity because that's what they choose to identify as, because that comes from their language, that comes from their nationality, that comes from their culture, their religion. That's who they identify as, and that's who they are. Not to acknowledge this as like a difference or something that can divide the society, but just to say, hey, I see you and I respect what you identify as. Not, I look at the color of your skin and I automatically think, oh, that person's Black, because I could have a brown skin tone or a darker brown skin tone and be Middle Eastern, or I could come from somewhere else, but you don't know until you ask somebody. So I think it's more important to ask them or let them tell you who they are and what they are, versus being quick to put people into categories of colored and white, or this is a person of color, because we often do people of color if anybody that isn't white is a person of color, but we never take the time to break down what makes a person of color. So I think we need to focus on those things versus being quick to make it into a majority and a minority, a Black and a white situation, because there's a lot of things in between that make up individuals, if that answers the question.
I think you did a fantastic job answering that question. I think you gave some really, really useful and incredibly insightful information. With that, I would like to say if anyone else would like to respond to that prompt, they absolutely can.
I would just like to say something really quick. I believe with not acknowledging, I'm so sorry, with not acknowledging race, it's very easy for some people to look past or look over certain characteristics that make us us. While it is kind of dividing to be like, oh, you're one race or you're one race, like the term melting pot, for example, that's typically used with cultures, but with race, if one were to say, oh, I don't really see color, sometimes you miss the points and the characteristics that make someone who is of color someone who is of color. That's all I wanted to say.
Can I touch off of that?
Of course.
I don't think like what I was saying, I don't want it to be misinterpreted as to say like, don't notice the difference. I'm saying race as a whole, like everybody is a human. So we fall into the human race. And I think that's where we need to be able to distinguish the difference between making a race and an ethnicity class, because ethnicity is where you take the time to realize what our differences are and to where we fall into, not just culturally, but even within society. I guess you could put that into more of that versus the race being like, are you a part of the human race, or are you a part of, if we were on a grand scheme of things, like an extraterrestrial, like something like that, like it's more of a bigger thing, because I'm like afraid when we say race, people are so quick to be like, well, you're part of the Black race. Like race is genetic, and like Black isn't a gene. You can't find something in your DNA to be like, oh, that person's Black, because when you're looking at genetics, you don't see color. So I feel like that's where we don't take enough time to explain to people the difference between what makes you a human and what makes you have an ethnicity. That's all I meant. I definitely agree with you. We can't not look at the differences.
Yes, and I'd like to say, I really like the point that you made about how when you look at genes, you don't just see, oh, someone's Black. You see their genes, you see them as a person and not just defined on their race. So I think that's a really nice point that you made.
Would anyone else like to comment off of this discussion? Alrighty, I'm going to move on to the next prompt. So this question is pretty broad, so I feel like this might be a little bit of a lengthier response. What can I do about racism? And I'm going to hand this question over to Alivia to start.
Okay, so I think one of the most important things to do is to educate yourself and to take the time to do that. I don't think you can really understand racism or understand something that a person of color goes through without educating yourself. And I think that that's where you're going to make the most progress with it, is trying to educate yourself. Also, you can also like ask people questions, like if you have any questions. I know if anyone were to ask me a question, I would feel comfortable answering that question and educating them. Like that's what I want to do. I want to help people understand what people of color go through in their everyday life. And also to acknowledge when people are being racist and defend others, speak up, use your voice. Don't just be silent about it.
Would anyone else like to comment off of any of Olivia's points or just the prompt in general?
I would like to comment a little bit of what Alivia said. She made a really good point about using your voice and talking about it. And that's where I was going with my response as well. I believe one of the biggest things you can do is have that conversation, start talking at home with family members, especially with older generation family members. You really want to have that talk, because if you don't start at home, you really can't start anywhere. But starting at home really brings out family's true colors, and you can talk about that with your parents, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, talking with your friends, especially in a social setting. Social media is so big nowadays. It's so easy to overlook racial topics and just go to the funny stuff, the heartwarming stuff. But getting in depth in conversation with your friends and establishing that, hey, this will not fly, is where you can really hit home. Another thing is, in a social setting, school is a huge, huge, huge place where racism occurs the most. That's where I personally felt a lot of racism in middle school. But acknowledging that happens in a social setting and just talking about it, asking questions, going to advisors if you don't know, research, it's where a big part of this problem is stemming from, is the lack of conversation.
Australyah or Dr. Mumford, would either of you guys like to chime in? Okay, so this question is specifically for Monica and Alivia. Of course, Australyah and Dr. Mumford, you guys are totally allowed, after they've said stuff, to jump in and make any comments or statements you want. The question is, how can the younger generation help to change the thinking of the older generation, specifically on the topic of systemic racism, and how can they help to promote progress for the future? Either Alivia or Monica, whichever of you want to start.
I can start for this if Olivia doesn't mind. I believe that one of the biggest things that we can do is vote and be educated on who we're voting for the reason that there are many people in power that have a closed mind to racial issues, are not educated on racial issues, are reluctant to learn on racial issues. And as we, as a younger generation, really go out and become educated on who we're voting for, we know who's in office and who is going to take initiative and take a step to reduce the amount of racism in this country specifically. So that is just a big point that I want to drive, is learning about candidates during election periods is one of the biggest moves we can take to try to take down racism.
Thank you. Alivia, do you have anything else to comment on that?
As we grow up as children, we are taught to respect people who are older than us, like our elders. And I think that when you grow up with that kind of mindset and you're taught that, you kind of are programmed to believe that you should match other people's beliefs, or when someone believes something, like you shouldn't say anything because they're older than you, they know more, or just out of respect. And I feel like it needs to be taught that you can have a different opinion and you can try to change other people's opinions, and you can have an educated discussion with someone older than you without being disrespectful.
Thank you to both of you. Sorry about me stumbling over my words a little bit. Australyah or Dr. Mumford, did either of you want to say anything about the younger generation and how they can promote some progress and change?
I can. I am involved in the NAACP on a state level and also on Central Michigan's campus. And on a state level, what we do is work with our youth councils and our college divisions. So a lot of times, people can't vote, or like they're not old enough to vote yet. And we forget that that's where a lot of our numbers come from in the advocacy world, is the youth. They tend to lead a lot of the movements, especially nowadays. So I think what we can do is, individuals that can't vote, what you can do to help move the vote is educate yourself on it and educate the people who are old enough to vote. If you see that maybe, your parents, for example, aren't too into the election, but you know that like your life is essentially depending on it, you can take the time to educate yourself and try to educate people who will take the time to listen to you, because you can encourage them to vote on your behalf. And I think that's something that's important, is that people that can't vote, like their voices are being suppressed because they don't have the right to express it right now. So giving people that have the right to vote and have the ability to vote, your voice and how you feel, that'll encourage them to make that decision as well.
Thank you so much for all of that. If anyone else has any other comments, I want to just leave the floor open. And if there isn't, I'll move on to the next section of prompts. Alrighty. This is for everyone, but I'm going to have it start with Dr. Mumford. What are your thoughts and feelings on white privilege, and have you ever experienced it in your daily life?
Well, my thoughts are, I think it exists, and I think it needs to be acknowledged, no matter how uncomfortable. And yes, I've experienced it. Think about this as context. You know, I'm the first person in my entire family to go to college, first generation. Not uncommon, I guess, for people to be first generation. But where privilege comes in is my parents could not get a good education because the schools were so segregated. And to go past high school, you literally had to leave home. And so, well, to go to high school, you literally had to leave home. And we're talking I'm just a generation or two from you guys, not that far. But so my parents couldn't get a good education, nor did they have full voting rights. You know, I was born at a time when I'm the first person in my family my sister and I, to have full voting rights. Think about that. You know, it's kind of, when you think about it. And, you know, you kind of grow up with these sayings, like, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far. And that all deals with privilege. But examples that really stand out are, there have been multiple times where I've supervised someone and we can go in a setting and that person is with me, and more times than not, people assume that that person is my supervisor and they direct questions to that person. And that person has to let them know that, no, this is Dr. Mumford and he's my supervisor. So those are just a few examples. Yes, it exists. Yes, I've experienced it. Those are a few examples, but there's so many others that I could give.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to respond to that prompt? Australia, Olivia, Monica, anybody can just jump right in.
I can go. Just an example that I have that touches on kind of white privilege, but also just privilege within color, because I don't know if a lot of people are aware of that. I am biracial, so my father is Black and my mother is white. And I've noticed that if I step into a room alone, for example, I sat on a Board of Trustees meeting to discuss some racial events that happened on campus. And when I spoke, their body language and the attention of certain individuals was completely different than when the white counterpart next to me spoke about what was important to them. That is a sign of white privilege, that the important people where you pay to go to school will pay attention to your struggles and pay attention to what you're asking for because of the color of your skin, because our topics were completely different. But something else that I have noticed that not a lot of people know is, like, if I walk into a room with somebody that might be darker skinned than me, they'll do the same thing that Dr. Mumford had mentioned, where they'll think that maybe I am the president of an organization and they're not. And it might be that the roles are reversed. So a lot of times people take the color of your skin into consideration before they take the time to speak to you. And privilege can come in like all forms, but white privilege is such a prevalent thing because they're the majority in a lot of situations, especially once you start to get into higher education.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that's a really good perspective to talk about. And especially since you have seen it in a higher education setting, that is a really prevalent issue. Monica or Olivia, do either of you guys want to comment on anything?
I do want to just comment on something that I've noticed. With white privilege, although it is typically a negative and a con towards Black people in specifics, I have noticed that it can also be used for the greater good. For example, if you see a man, if you are white and you see a man who is Black, for example, that is being racially profiled, you as a white individual have a voice where you can interject, or you can use your color as, or sorry, lack of color, as an advantage, and as a shield almost. And I kind of shy away from saying a shield because I don't want to go into like a white savior type of complex, but it is something that can be used for good, and it's not always a negative thing, although it does have a lot of negative effects on others who do not have the opportunity to experience it.
Thank you so much. Are we ready to move on to the next prompt? All right. How have you navigated living and working in a predominantly white community? I'm going to give this to Olivia to start off.
I was taught to code switch. And I learned at a very young age that instead of code switching, I would just change my voice completely and I would talk this way for the rest of my life. And I have a lot of people that tell me, oh, you sound really white. No, it's just something that I was taught to do so that people would respect me. If you use certain language, slang, ebonics, people tend to think that you are less educated or they label you as ghetto. So at a very young age, I was programmed, trained to speak this way because I grew up in a white neighborhood. And if I didn't, then I wouldn't get the same respect that I receive now.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Would anyone else like to share their experience or their statement on that particular prompt?
I would like to share.
Absolutely, Monica.
Going off briefly of what Olivia said with ebonics specifically, in middle school, I was told frequently by my friends at the time that, oh, you act so white, you speak so white. And it was nothing that I ever really thought about in the time being. I just thought, I'm just being like everyone else, like this is normal. I don't know what you're talking about. But definitely, I started to notice that more when I hung out with people that had the same color as me. And I noticed, oh, I do this little switch in my type of voice and my type of personality. I noticed that when I was with groups of white people, I wouldn't speak out as much of what I believed in. I would stay kind of repressed, suppressed, quiet, and with other groups that just wouldn't be the same thing. So it is something that I've experienced and something that I'm very aware of now, as before I was not.
I can share like a few brief experiences. Like Olivia and Monica both said, code switching was taught to me when I was very, very young. And my dad was the first person to really show me what it was and also teach me what it was when he would talk to his coworkers or some of like his white friends, and his voice would change, just the way that he would pronounce certain words or even topics that he would discuss, everything was completely different versus when he spoke to his family or when he spoke to us, it was more relaxed. And I think that that's something that I've been taught even while coming into college. I took a class and we focused on ebonics for a while. And I didn't know that for a while, I think back in 1978 or so, there were a few schools that were on the East Coast that taught ebonics as a class. and they divided their schools into sections where, you know, white students and Black students couldn't be together because Black students spoke Ebonics, and that was a completely different language than English. So this is like a deeply rooted thing that I've never heard two other Black women or women of color speak about being taught being taught to code switch, I'm sorry, at such a young age. And that's kind of disappointing because we, from a young age, are so molded into what society is going to tell us. Like, you can't say this word like this because you're not going to be respected. You can't speak like this. You can't wear clothes like this because people are going to look at you differently. Everything that we do is like, you know, you have to have a professional side and then you can have your normal side. But working in a predominantly white area, going to predominantly white schools, I went to a predominantly white high school. And I had to switch out of 2 of my history classes in the same year because I had issues with the teacher thinking I was not capable of like fulfilling the assignments. She would ask me in front of the class, like, Australia, do you think you're capable of doing this? Or do you think you're capable of writing from a white perspective about slavery in the South? Like, blatant questions that she just felt comfortable asking. There were times where in one of my history classes, as soon as I would walk into the class, the teacher would already have an issue with the way that I spoke, or if I wasn't writing fast enough, and she would send me to the office. And it got to the point where me and the principal were like best friends, like on a first name basis, because I was always in his office. Like, my parents had to be called, you know, there were emails always being sent out, and I had to get switched out of those classes. There were instances with sporting events where I was the only Black girl on the team, and the away team would yell names or make these calls at me or say that I had like weapons on me or be careful just because I was a different skin tone. I think a lot of times people don't realize, and I think a lot of people say this, but they really don't realize the struggle of like a minority student when they're growing up in their young ages, because like that's your ages of development. So those comments are things that like stick to you, and no matter how hard you try to forget what happened to you or try to move on from that teacher hurting your feelings or somebody bullying you about your hair or your skin color or making noises at you, like those are such important ages that you can't get past those kind of things. You know, you maybe will forget them, but somebody will do that to you when you're older, and that'll make you remember like, oh, in high school that happened to me too. Like, this isn't a first time thing. It's hard, and that's coming from somebody who's mixed. Like, I mean, my mother taught me at a young age that like there was going to be a difference when I got into a white school, and she wasn't sure how to tell me because she can't experience those feelings. You know, she doesn't know how to deal with them, but she tried to warn me, you know, at a young age, warning your child like, oh, living in a white area is going to be hard. Like, that's a hard thing to say as a parent. So definitely a difference. I think people need to realize that, like, when people say that they've been bullied in a white area, they're not exaggerating. They're probably not joking. They're not saying it to be cool or relate to everybody else. Like, this is a day-to-day thing that really happens.
Thank you also. Oh,
I would like to add a little to that. One of the common themes that we hear between all the panelists that just spoke is they're speaking a common language. You hear them talking about code switching, and the character from the book Star, you know, you saw how she had to navigate how to live in these 2 different worlds, and we've all mastered that. But imagine if you will, the strain that takes on you over time to literally have to have this double consciousness, as W.E.B. Du Bois talked about, to be 2 people, you know, literally living in these 2 different worlds, and have to switch all the time, code switch to fit into your different groups. It's amazing, but you know, just hearing the panelists all speak the same language, we all know this. It's common to us.
Thank you all so much for sharing your perspective on this. And I would just like to say that you both have that all of you have enlightened me. I did actually not know what the term code switching was. I had known that it was a thing in the African American community to have the double personality and having to talk in a specific way to sound more appealing, to sound more professional. But I did not know there was even a term for it. And that's pretty insane to think about, that you all have to know that and do that from a really young age. All right, I'm going to move on to the next prompt as long as everyone doesn't have anything else to comment on. What are some instances in which you have had to think about your actions and how they will be perceived, or how others might respond to you that might be different than a person who appears white? I'm going to start with Monica on this one.
I have two really big instances. The first one is a lot of times throughout high school and middle school, arguments happen with friends. It's just natural. You get heated about some things, and so many times I've been told, oh, like, don't get too angry now, because being a mad Black girl was aggressive, and I couldn't just have my feelings. I had to be labeled as, oh, she's that one loud Black girl that gets after people because she's angry. That definitely forced me to really pay attention to my situation and to how I'm feeling. When I start to feel kind of heated up, I'm so quick to be like, oh, I can't show any emotion. I need to relax. I need to be calm. I need to be quiet. Another instance, this is more physical, is my mom would always see me about to leave the house, and I'd be dressed in sweatpants and a hoodie, and I would have my hood up over my head. And my mom would tell me, no, 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 take off your hood, take off your hood. And for the longest time, I wondered why. Like, the girls at school, they have their hoods up, everything's fine. And I realized my appearance as a Black girl with a hood, I just automatically look suspicious to some, while as people who are my same age, same grade, are doing the same thing, and they're just seemed as, you know, fashion sense, it's just a trend. But for me, it was completely different.
Would anyone else like to respond to that prompt?
I'd like to add to what Monica said. You know, I can never be, in the work environment, I can never be too passionate, because there's a common stereotype that you would become the angry Black man. And so you can never be too passionate. Others, they're just showing passion. But if it's me, you know, it's, you know, he's angry. And I'd say the other instance where you just have to really think about your actions is whenever you get stopped by the police. I mean, it's fearful when I get stopped by the police. You know, I think my white counterparts, the police, they never have to think. The police are they're protectors, and that's how it's always viewed, as they're the protectors, period. You know, but there's a fear when you get stopped by the police, because you know if you don't do everything just right, you may not make it home. And that's the common theme, is just do hands, you know, where they need to be so they can see it, comply with everything, just so you can make it home safe. And I still have these conversations, and I'm older and have never been in trouble with the law in my life. I still have these conversations with my friends.
I can also touch on the topic, and I think that, like, what Monica and Dr. Mumford are saying about that angry Black male or female stereotype is something that I think everybody deals with. But I honestly feel like all of our actions and all of our words on a daily basis are something that's monitored. Like Dr. Mumford said, passion is normally something that's like exciting, or, you know, even if you're passionate, like you're upset about something, the way that it went, but that's your passion. Like, you know, you really believe in what you were doing and it didn't go the way you went or you wanted it to go. You know, when you are of a darker skin tone, when you are a person of color, you can't respond to that because there's a quick label of, oh, they're mad, they're Black, they're angry, they're this. And I think that that's something that can be seen every single day. You know, if I respond the wrong way, or if I have a slight tone difference in somebody else, or, you know, even if my voice is deeper than somebody, or my hairstyle is a certain way, all of those factors go into how somebody might look at me. You know, I could be wearing the outfit and then a white woman could be wearing the same outfit, but because I have a different body type, or if it hugs my body a different way, that could be perceived as me being over sexual, or like maybe underdressed, or something small like that. There are very little things that like everybody will look at when you are a person of color and find something to nitpick at. If it's, like I said, the tone in my voice, I might not have a high pitched voice, so somebody might think I have attitude. But really, you know, that's how I speak. Like, I can't change things that are already, you know, made for my body or made for myself. I do think that that's important, and it's unfortunate that we all say the angry Black woman, the angry Black man stereotype, because that's what we were told. That's what we've always been told. And I think that causes a lot of issues within our communities because we don't know how to express ourselves anymore. I think that suppresses a lot of our emotions, which could cause people to become angry, because when I had the opportunity to express it, I was too afraid. Or when I had the opportunity to express it, I knew that it was going to hurt me in the long run. Yeah, I think it's really unfortunate that we all have that same common feeling.
Olivia, did you want to touch on anything in this particular prompt? Alrighty, I'll move on to the next one then. I'm gonna have this start off with Olivia. In your opinion, how can trust be restored in the justice system?
Things that need to be said and admitted, especially with the police. It started out as slave patrol, and then it was to reinforce Jim Crow laws, stop people from voting, and now we have police departments everywhere. I think that there needs to be a discussion about racial profiling within police departments in the justice system, lack of resources in urban areas. There needs to be a lot done.
If anyone else would like to share their thoughts on that, they can feel free to jump in at any point.
In my opinion, how trust can be restored in the justice system is both parties working together to solve this problem, rather just playing like the finger blame game, which is so easy to do. And it is so easy to be apprehensive to work with a force that originally wasn't even supposed to protect us. If anything, it was supposed to hurt us. So it is a major leap and a major jump for a lot of individuals to say, yes, I can comfortably trust in the police. But I believe one of the biggest things the police force could do is just show that solidarity of, you know, we stand with you with what you're going through. I believe a couple months ago, the first march that was led through in Mount Pleasant, you know, the police was there to lead us through Mission and down, I believe, Michigan, all the way to downtown and back. And one of the questions I had in the back of my mind are they here because it's their legal obligation, or are they here because they genuinely feel for the Black community going through this? And that's something to this day I don't know. And I would like to hope and believe that they really were here to support us, and it wasn't just a legal obligation that was held by the public. So one really big thing we can do as an entire group is just to try our best to work together rather than blame one another.
Here, I don't think this one is too difficult. I think it's really a simple premise. Trust can be restored when there's a feeling that Lady Justice is truly blind, and that they're not these two systems. There's two systems of justice, that when people commit a crime, no matter what you look like, no matter who your friends are, that you're treated equally. And I think if people felt a sense of that happens, like when we literally see somebody get murdered, is it too much to ask that they get arrested? You know, we all know that if that happened to us, if we murdered somebody, we would be arrested. Those are just simple things that justice really be fair, you know, and that's when trust can be stored, when there is that sense of fairness, and those ideas that it's based upon are just, we love it. We live up to those. I think it's really not that difficult, and people aren't asking for too much, just fairness.
Australia, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that conversation at all?
No,
Okay.
I'm okay.
Okay. Okay. I couldn't tell if your head was shaking or not. Alrighty. The next question is, what are your thoughts on how police brutality should be addressed in the United States? Do you believe that the police should be defunded, as many activists say, or should there be another method of preventing more brutality and violence? And Australia, I have this written down to start with you.
Okay, so as far as my thoughts on how police brutality should be addressed in the United States, I think that there's a lot of legislation and reworking that needs to be done within the police department, on all levels, local, state, whatever it may be. I think what we had talked about the banning of the knee hold, I think that that is something that like we really need to work towards. We need to focus on how the next question you asked about defunding the police. I think it's important to articulate what we mean by defunding the police, which could be defunding and reallocating those funds. So not necessarily, and I'm saying this on like things that I've heard from several people. So when people say defund the police, it could be reallocating that money, the extra money that it would be given to the police department to hire social workers, to hire mental health workers, to hire more people that can go out alongside the police to answer those calls. So if a mental health call comes in, it would be a police officer to be there for protection, but also a mental health worker. Or it could be the whole form of defunding the police and giving it a try without the police and seeing where that goes. So instead, when a call comes in, no police go out, but like I said, child protective services goes out, or mental health services team goes out instead of sending police, because the police aren't always trained properly on how to handle every situation. There's so many reasons why the police may be called, but they cannot efficiently answer every single call to the best of like their professional knowledge. You know, they don't spend 8+ years becoming a doctor in a certain field, so they don't know how to answer that. I believe when we looked at it, police training was less than a year, maybe a year max, and there's no way that you're covering all mental health checks. There's no way you're covering the best suicide prevention, how to talk somebody down from that. There's no way you know how to accurately respond to a domestic violence call for every type of domestic violence there is. You know, everything is just so broad. For one person to be expected to know how to answer every single call is unreasonable. So there's no reason why we can't take the excess funds that we're giving to the police department to reallocate them to somebody who may know how to answer that call better than they do. Not necessarily saying that there's no reason for them, but you know, the expectations that are given to the police officers are ridiculous, because, you know, maybe they're getting overworked or they don't know how to handle the situation, and then they become feeling threatened, and then it turns into a whole different situation. You know, I know a lot of police officers who have talked about their experiences where they go maybe on a suicide call and the person is just so in distress that they also begin to feel threatened and they don't know how to respond to that. And then, you know, maybe somebody wants to attack, or, you know, they're just so out of their mind, they just can't calm themselves down. So then, yeah, you know, the police officer may fear for their life, but that other person is also fearing for their life as well. So having somebody there who's a professional in that field, I think would help de-escalate a lot of situations. I think it would knock out a lot of police brutality because there would be somebody who knows how to handle that situation. There's a lot of things though that we could do. Like I said, legislation, like we've talked about before, getting out to vote. Voting is like our biggest thing that we can do. You know, that's how our society operates. So if we don't put elected officials in these positions who want to end police brutality, who have ideas that could better our communities, better the relations between the police and civilians, if we're not voting for those people to be in office, like the trends are going to continue, and we're going to have 52 days of protests. We're going to have, you know, unfortunately, several situations that we don't want to be in. And I think that if we reallocated some funds, we could make a step towards a better future.
Would anyone else like to respond to that prompt?
I would like to.
Absolutely.
Australia made a really good point about how some officers generally don't know how to approach a situation, and it would be better if there was a professional that was trained in that field for many years to either accompany or go in place of that said police officer. One thing that I think that would really lessen the amount of police brutality that occurs is if there were mandated classes that people within the force had to attend, whether it's to how to de-escalate a situation, and that might already be a class that I don't know about, but how to de-escalate, how to approach someone who seems aggressive, how there is, if the last resort is to shoot, you know, maybe the way they go about it. I'm not exactly sure what it would entail, the classes, but I believe that would be a really good starting point. And taking some of those funds that would typically go towards, let's say, like new uniforms, or let's say ghostwriting on squad cars or different squad cars, just, I'm not quite sure what goes into police funding, but some of those reallocated towards helping them become more aware of issues that they're not aware about could be a major step that would help this problem.
Does anybody else want to share any thoughts off of those two comments? Alrighty, I'll move on to the next prompt. Do you think that political bias is furthering prejudice towards the African American and people of color community? Dr. Mumford, I'm going to pass this to you first.
Well, let me start by saying that some of my best friends are police officers. That was a joke, but that is true. Some of my best friends are police officers. Some of my closest friends, lifelong friends, are police officers. And so I do think that the political system is so divisive right now, and it really focuses on our differences rather than how we are, what we have in common, and how we're similar, and seeking to solve problems. And as an example, you know, it usually goes to the extremes of what some have called the tyranny of the or. So when we have conversations about police brutality, as in Colin Kaepernick and others, that's twisted, not listening to the real conversation or the issues, but it becomes a conversation of patriotism and who's a patriot and who's not dealing with this underlying situation. Or when we have protests, because they're real issues of police brutality, we can actually see people getting murdered. Nobody wants to deal with that, so it's twisted to a conversation about law and order. And I think that's what our political system has done. It's become extremely divisive, and not really geared towards actually dealing with real problems and solving real problems. And so I'm happy to see you young people, because I'm confident that you're going to be able to get this stuff done.
Can I say something as well? Um, I think you made like a really good point on how the parties are very creative in the way that they differentiate between the ethnicities and the race, I guess you could say. But I think something that I've noticed as I've gotten older and started to pay more attention to the small details of politics is that a lot of our politicians are out to buy the vote of people of color. You know, that there's been times where I've watched politicians promise, people of color, like, I'm here for you, I support you. These are the things I'm going to do when I get into office. And then they get into office and they do complete opposite, but they needed our vote. In some areas where like a lot of the vote is going to come from Black individuals, instead of people going out to vote, they might not vote because they feel that politicians, are not for them, or they don't think that their vote is going to count. And I think that's something that like my generation especially has been trying to stress, is that like every vote counts. But I think what's becoming difficult is knowing, who do I place my vote with, or like, how do we get there? Because the political parties are so, like I said, creative with their words, and they're buying power. The way that they make people feel comfortable with the promises that they make, or the platforms that they speak on. I think that's something that we need to start paying attention to when it comes to political power, and the power that we as citizens have. Our voting power goes a long way. So definitely paying attention to that.
Does anybody else have some comments to that?
Just a quick comment on what Australia said, with politicians wanting to buy our votes. It does create a lot of mistrust, and it does get to a point where I believe many think, okay, what's the point of even voting if every time I vote, I get let down? And I believe as like a whole group, generation, it's really important not to give up after that happens, because I feel as if a lot of people, even my age, feel that type of way where, okay, we voted and, this didn't happen, so what's the point of voting again? But that's the time you really need to start voting, and to not give up just because of being let down.
Thank you all so much. Are there any other comments, or do you want me to move on to the next prompt?
I feel like this whole, the issue with like police brutality and racism has really turned into a very political thing when it's not political at all. It has nothing to do with your political party or where you sit on a conservative to liberal spectrum. It's a human rights issue, and it should be treated as such.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think racism needs to be classified everywhere as a human rights issue, because it is a violation of all of our rights. I really like that you mentioned that.
These next two questions are specifically geared for Monica and Alivia, but I want to make sure that Dr. Mumford and Australia also know. You guys can feel free to jump in if you have any further commentation. All right, so the first one is, what is something a high school student can do to promote inclusivity? Monica or Alivia, either of you can start that off.
As a former high school student just graduating, one thing that I could have done, or that anyone can do to promote being inclusive, is to really stand up for what you believe in, and also reach out to groups that might be underrepresented. For example, one thing I did notice a lot and kind of question a little bit is that I really wish, as a Black individual, there was an advisor at our school that I could go talk to that felt my same experiences. And as far as I know, there is one teacher in the building that was Black. And although we live in a predominantly white city, it still kind of was shocking. And it was something that I never found a lot of courage doing. But asking for these type of things from the administration is something that by all means people should do. Asking to have an advisor or to have, I don't want to say like a room as of like a safe haven, but even that, to provide like a safe space for those who feel excluded and underrepresented would be a really good step to take.
That I wish I had done sooner, like Monica, is spoken up about different things that I had issues with or saw an issue with. It wasn't until this year, actually, I had actually spoken up about a lot of my experiences and a lot of the things that I would like to see, specifically in Mount Pleasant area schools. I actually had a meeting with people on the school board and the superintendent, and it went very, very well. And they actually said they had wished that more people had come with me and more people spoke up about it. They're willing to speak to you. They're willing to hear you out. They want to know those kinds of things and they want to be able to do better. So I wish that I hadn't been afraid to do it when I was younger. I wish I had done it when I was in school so I could see that change now, but I am glad that I am able to help with that change and bring light to it now.
Thank you both so much. The second question is, do you believe youth can have an impact and change beliefs of established community members, specifically adult ones?
I really do believe that youth has a pretty big voice on members in our community. As our generation, we are just a force to be reckoned with. We're very loud and very dedicated to getting what we want. In the community, for example, having these protests, there were so many cars that passed by that were filled with white women and white men that, you know, gave me a fist, that gave me a nod, that honked their horn in solidarity. And that just showed the impact that I had as a youth member. I really was getting through to people who were a couple generations above me. And I believe that with looking at that and taking away from that experience, that it's something that I really encourage people at this age, especially, or even younger, to not be afraid to take that chance, that opportunity to talk to older people, to have protests maybe in a neighborhood that is filled with older generation perhaps, but just to really reach out.
Like I said, I had a meeting with the school board and never thought that I was going to be able to do that. I thought I was just one person. I'm 19 years old. Why would they listen to me? Why would they want to hear what I have to say? And they wish that I had talked to them sooner. They wish that people would come to them and talk to them. I helped organize a protest in Midland for over 1,200 people, and I never thought that I would be able to do that, or I had the power to do that. And it really made me feel good, and also made me wish that more people would step out of their comfort zones and do things like this and talk about things that bother them, stand up for what they believe in, because we really can make a difference.
Just another quick thing to add, something I have noticed. I was on Facebook just a couple days ago, and I can't remember the man's name, but he was standing on the corner of Rick's with a sign, and I believe he went to Cheers in Mount Pleasant, and there was a racial comment made about him, and he immediately went to social media to talk about it. And I remember seeing so many older individuals that were like, wow, I didn't realize that racism was such a prevalent issue in Mount Pleasant, and that happens here, and they're almost shocked about it. And a lot of people were taking a stand saying this is not right, like this is not what Mount Pleasant stands for. And there was just so much conversation happening in that comments, just so many. And there was still a lot of people in the older generation that were like, oh, that doesn't happen here. Well, you know, you shouldn't get offended by that. It's just a joke. But there was also people that were that same age group that were like, no, you know, I'm seeing this and we can't do this. We can't allow this to happen. And so that was an incident that I just saw recently that happened that really shows that youth can take a stand.
Thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts. And Dr. Mumford or Australia, do either of you have any comments to that at all? Or
Yeah, I just want to touch on like the idea of the youth. Like I said earlier, like the youth really drive a lot of the movements. The civil rights movement was so large because of the youth. Like the youth were the ones that were at the sit-ins. The youth were the ones doing the bus boycotts. You know, they were the ones on the ground working to make a change. You know, yes, the adults were standing behind them with the support. The adults were the ones putting the plans together, but the youth were the ones that were out there making it happen. And I think that students really need to realize the power that you have in numbers. And even if you stand alone, like Alivia said, like she was in there by herself. Yes, she could have brought people, you know, next time she knows, you know, to bring people. But the impact that she had on those board members was probably a lot larger than she would have ever imagined going in there as a single person, because, you know, you have such a voice. And once you find it, you make such a difference. I think something that I've learned while working in higher education and like using my voice is like, don't stop until you get what you want. When you're a youth, you have energy, because when I tell you I'm a senior and I am burnt out, you know, it is tiring. Advocacy is tiring, but it's important. And like, if you're passionate about it, it will drive you to make a change. So when you find your passion, you're able to identify like, this is what I want to build my life around, you know, this is what I want to make a change in. It's not going to seem like work. It's going to start coming naturally to you, because you're going to start speaking off of experience. You're going to start speaking off of your gut reaction, because your gut is telling you the right thing. There's going to be small things that you start to learn about yourself. And while you're in your youth years, and I'm saying this like I'm not still slightly in my youth years, you know, but like just things that I've learned over the past 4 years, you just start to move once you figure out your footing and once you find your foundation. And it's good to find it when you're younger, because you're just so much more powerful. You just have so much more energy to get the job done, and you know, you'll have your peers to support you. I think that's a big thing, is making sure that you really stay like consistent and driven as a youth in this movement. Like, keeping your eye on the prize, I guess you could say, because you know what you want to change, and you know that it's able to be done. You just need to really believe in yourself. Once the youth believe that they can make a change, it's over for the rest of it.
thank you all so much for all of those comments. And we're on to our final section, our last 3 questions. So, with the new occurrences of racial bias and systemic racism seeming to come almost daily in the news, do you see any positive change occurring? And do you remain hopeful for marked improvement? And I'm going to pass this off to Dr. Mumford first.
Well, thank you. And first, I'd just like to say that it's not new. It's just being televised. You know, it's not new. It's been occurring for you know, a long time, but it's just being televised now. And people have, you know, phones that can record, and so it's being televised now. But I do see some things that give me hope. I do see some things that are positive, just like the youth that you just talked to. I can't wait for you to ask an older person question, but they give me hope. They give me real hope, because I've said for a long time now, there seemed to be such a gap between what happened in the 60s, and it was almost like young people fell asleep because, you know, racism was going away. But recently it's like a giant has been awakened, and the young people have woken up, because they're seeing things they never thought they'd see in their lifetimes that happened to their grandparents. you know. And so that gives me hope that the youth are, as Australia said, if they only recognize their power, they could change. They have the power to change all of this. The second things that give me real hope is that when I saw these protests, I saw it looked a lot different than the protests of the 60s. There are a lot of allies. There were a lot of people that were protesting that were not Black. That gives me hope, tremendous hope, that things can and will change. And so, you know, if you're a student of history and you listen to people like Dr. Martin Luther King, you know, he said that the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. So it might take a while, but things do change. And I have real hope because of the youth and because of the allies that are joining in this fight.
Thank you so much for your insight on that. Does anyone else have anything else that they would like to add on? Alrighty. There's a lot of reference and talk about being an ally. What suggestions do you have to help people stay engaged and continue to work as an ally? And I'm going to pass this off to Australia to start off.
This topic is really important to me, actually, because I think there are ways that you can be an ally without overstepping. And I think that's something that first comes with education. How do you be an ally? You know, you need to educate yourself, like we talked about before. You need to try to obtain as much knowledge as you can about the topic so that when somebody's speaking to you, you can not necessarily relate to them on like an emotional or an experience level, but you can relate to them in the sense that you know what they're talking about. I also think that there's ways to be an ally, like I said, without overstepping, which means, you know, asking them, what can I do for you? Or how can I help? Not necessarily coming into a situation like, for example, with the Black Lives Matter protest. Instead of, you know, one white person being like, I'm going to plan a protest for Black Lives Matter, they could use their voice, their resources, their privilege, like we talked about, you know, their connections, and uplift a Black member that's also planning a protest to combine it. Like, that's how you become an ally. You use your resources and what you have to offer to another individual to better empower what they're saying. Like, you're giving what you have to uplift their voice. So you're not speaking over them and you're not telling them what to do, but you're supporting them. And I think that's something that like we have seen within these recent protests is the solidarity portion of it. You know, there are all types of individuals of color that are out there on those protests. Like we said, there were a lot of white people that were protesting, that were holding up signs like, you know, I may not know what you're going through, but I see you, I hear you, you know, I'm standing here with you. And I think those are the most important things that you can say to somebody when they're going through times like this is, I'm here with you. I see what you're going through and I want to help you. I'll use my resources to the best of my ability to help you because I'm just as passionate about this movement as you are, because, you know, maybe we have privileges that the other people don't have that we're fighting for. Excuse me. I also had the opportunity to host a protest in Lansing at the state capitol, and the amount of allies that we had within corporations or just local businesses that came around. You know, we had people donating truckloads of bottled water and snacks, hand sanitizer, masks. Like, even if they couldn't be out there protesting with us, or even if they couldn't relate to us, they donated what they could to help us get to where we needed to go. And I think it's amazing. You know, I didn't think that we would ever be in a situation where I would have to reach out to X, Y, and Z to be like, hey, like, we need you to be an ally in this movement. Like, we can't do this alone. And I think that's the biggest thing that comes from having an ally, is knowing that, like, we can't stand on our own. This is, like we talked about, a human rights issue. This is a human rights violation. So this is going to take everybody to fix the issue. You know, Black people can't fight this by themselves, because this isn't an issue within just the Black community. This goes into several minority communities, you know, so this one movement might be affecting another movement, but we need allies for that one as well. So just recognizing like your privilege, the access that you have, and what you can contribute to the movement is, I think, how you can be the best ally.
I believe another way to be a really good ally or the best ally is to be there for the person, especially youth, being there for your friends and peers that you see in school that you see might be struggling with a racial social issue, just to be there and to say, what can I do to help, you know, reaching out to them. Another big thing is to be vocal about being an ally. It's very easy to show up to somewhere and be like, okay, I'm there for you, and just kind of move on your life. I believe it was in July, there was Blackout Tuesday where you posted a square on Instagram, on Twitter, which was a little, I believe, counterintuitive because it blocked out the feed. But anyway, that's besides the point. It's so easy to just post that picture and be like, yep, Black Lives Matter, and just move on with life. So easy to do that. You really need to go beyond that. And being an ally doesn't necessarily mean, okay, I'm standing with you during this march and that's it. You know, it's going beyond that and being like, hey, I just read something that I think this like could relate to your experience, or is this something you go through? I believe that being an ally should be a lifelong thing, not just a situational thing or just one event. It should be something that you are there for people throughout, thick and thin, when it's pretty, when it's ugly, not just when it's a trend or it's something that's currently on topic.
Can I say another thing? Just something that I've noticed, like I said, within these past couple years of work and just the classes that I've taken while I've been in school, is how cultural appropriation and being an ally tend to be, how do I say this, like connected, right? So you can't support or you can't like a culture or only like part of it. Like I'm going to support, you know, the fashion sense and the music, but I'm not going to support you when you're at your lowest. Like Monica said, you know, you can't enjoy the luxury items that like a culture or a group of people produce or share to the world and then not support them when the world is not respecting them, when the world is taking away their rights, you know. And maybe that's like a personal opinion. That is truly how I feel. You know, I can't support you when I like something that you have, but when you're struggling, I'm not there for you. I think Monica explained it really well. You know, you can't be there for the highs and not be there for the lows if you want to be considered an ally. I think you can also join organizations. You can join, you know, small groups, your community groups, anything that promotes like diversity, inclusion, equity, small things like that, anything to make, you know, you take your first step. And I know it's hard because not everybody is vocal. I mean, we've had protests on campus where, you know, some students are like, you know, I'm not comfortable speaking or I'm not comfortable doing this, but I do want to be your ally. So what can I do behind the scenes? Like, or what can I do to just contribute? You know, if you are comfortable finding your comfort zone and what you can speak about what you're knowledgeable about. And, you know, don't put yourself in a bad situation. Like if you're an ally, but you don't know 100% of the situation, maybe look at your partner or look at somebody and be like, I don't know how to answer this, but they can, because you can't speak on behalf of a whole group if you don't identify with that group. I mean, even if you do, you can't speak on behalf of everybody, but you can share your experience. So if somebody asks like, oh, you know, why is this organization created for X, Y, and Z, and you can't share personal experience, you know, be an ally and saying, I support this because of this, this, and this is why I contribute, but this person may know a little bit more. Don't speak if you don't know everything. I don't want to say that in like a harsh way, but sometimes that really is how it is, you know. They give out misinformation because they think they understand, but they don't necessarily get the whole root of the situation.
I think history is a great teacher. And what Monica and Australia pointed to about the need for allies and building allies is so vital. if you look back at history and you look at, some of the greatest gains in civil rights, and you look at Dr. Martin Luther King, one of his greatest frustrations was not what the bad people were doing. One of his greatest frustrations came from what he called the appalling silence of good people, people that knew that things were wrong and just wouldn't say or do anything about it. People that could be allies. That was one of his biggest frustrations. And he said we would one day have to atone for those sins. And so it's good to hear Monica and Australia, talk about the good work that they're doing. And like I said, it gives me hope. But as John Lewis said, we have to have allies. If real change is going to happen, and if they see something, they have to be willing to stand up and say something.
Thank you all so much for sharing. Are there any other comments?
I think just like lastly, being an ally, also understanding that like several movements branch from other movements, and several movements, can create another movement. So being able to understand that like, okay, I'm an ally of this specific civil rights movement, but that civil rights movement may be intertwined with another one, like Black rights and LGBTQ rights. They do intersect. So being able to identify, like, are you willing to be an ally for just, Black rights, or are you willing to be an ally for Black LGBTQ rights? Being able to identify where you stand, what your passion is. It's okay. I don't know how to say this without it sounding strange, but it's okay if you're not an ally to every movement. Like, you can't offer somebody just 50% of support, or you can't just offer them like, okay, like we talked about, I support you slightly, but like tomorrow I don't. If you're not 100% into something, or if you're not 75% into something, what are you really offering them as an ally? So just knowing like where you're comfortable, what you're okay with, being able to differentiate between, am I an ally to a terrorist group? Like, probably not. Am I an ally to a civil rights group? Like, yes, you need to be able to know where you stand on those spectrums. It's really important.
Thank you all so much. We are at our final question, which is, I guess, kind of great that it's our final question because it kind of encompasses everything we've talked about over the last hour and a half. It says, what are we trying to accomplish by addressing these issues within our community? And I'm going to pass this to Dr. Mumford to start us off.
Well, for me, again, it's really kind of simple. What we're trying to accomplish is to live up to certain ideas that the country was founded on. The things that really make America a great country. We realize that things aren't perfect, and that, but the goal is to always be striving to get perfect, to live up to those ideas. Those words that were inscribed on the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and they're endowed by certain inalienable rights. If that were true, if we were living up to that, then I think we wouldn't have to remind our neighbors and remind the world that Black lives matter too.
I think that another thing that we're really trying to address is that these issues are something that we see in history books. It's something that we see online. It's something that we see on the news, but it's also happening in our communities. It's happening in our neighborhood. It's happening in our school, at a soccer game. It's happening everywhere. And we're just trying to address awareness of it all, because so much of it goes unspoken for. So many incidents just go unknown. They fly underneath the radar, and we need to stop letting that happen. We need to stop being okay with these issues that are human rights. It's not political, like Olivia said. It's human rights issue. It's something we have a right to. And it's just very, very important that community members know about this. It's very important that our youth knows about this. It's very important that we're trying to let older generations know that what they did in the past is wrong, and this is our future. This is what's going to be expected from everyone in our community.
I think also what I've always been taught from when I was like younger was that racism is something that is taught to you. And I think that's something that a lot of people hear, you know, like hate is taught, racism is taught. I think something that I noticed like when I moved up here, even coming from another predominantly white area, we did have other individuals of color. Like maybe they weren't Black, but identified as something else. Um, when I came up here, I noticed that like I came into classes where people were like, oh yeah, I'm from up north. There's not even a Black person in my town. Or, you know, like I've never interacted with a Black individual. Like I only see them on TV or I see them here. I thought when people told me that, like it was a joke. Like my parents have told me when you go to college, you're probably going to meet people that have never met a Black person. I was like, okay, you're crazy. Like there's no way they've never came in contact with at least one. And when I got here and students were saying that, I was like, oh, my parents were right. Like as much as I hate to admit it, like they knew what they were talking about. And I think that really blew my mind is that you have to unlearn and be willing to teach an individual what is right. You have to be able to teach them that the prejudice that they believe and the stereotypes that they were taught or that they heard on TV is not true, because you know TV will make a Black individual look like nothing. There are often times where Black people portray roles that like don't uplift them or give people that stereotype of them being a thug or them being like in the hate you give, you know, they were so quick to be like, oh, well, he was dealing drugs or he was involved with this gang just right off the first, you know, look. And I think that if you see movies like that, or if you see TV shows like that, and you've never actually met a Black person, that's going to be what you believe that they're like. So you have to be willing to teach them, you know, this isn't what it really is. And they also need to be able to unlearn what they were taught, unlearn what they've seen. I think that's something that we try to accomplish by having these conversations, is like re-educating individuals. Like, this is the truth. These are stereotypes. This is a microaggression, which is something like we didn't really get to talk about in this topic. That's okay. But like just small things like your body language. This could be something that would like make a Black individual feel uncomfortable, make a person of color feel uncomfortable, you know, addressing them a certain way, just small things. But I think if we keep having conversations like this, panels like this, it's really going to help us push that mission and our goal. But aside from just conversations, like we need to put action behind our words. You know, we need to make sure that we have these conversations, but what are we going to do after this panel? What do we do after these conversations? How do we keep the community engaged? How do we make sure that like this hour and a half conversation wasn't for nothing? You know, how do we keep it going? I think that's something that we really need to focus on, because that will help us accomplish what we're looking for.
Olivia, do you have anything that you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I do think that one of the biggest things everyone is trying to accomplish is, as everyone kind of said, acknowledging the issue, because we do live in a predominantly white area. And a lot of those people don't see this on a daily basis. They don't understand it. They don't hear about it. And just because you don't live it, you don't see it, you don't hear about it, doesn't mean that it's not real and it doesn't happen. And I think that's one of the biggest things that everyone is trying to accomplish, is to just make it known, to let people understand, to try to educate themselves. Just so that like we're seen, we're heard, we want to be seen and heard by the community and other individuals.
Thank you all so much. So now I would like to open the floor once again for you all to share any closing remarks that you would like to say about the panel, about any of the topics we discussed, really just any closing thoughts that you would like to share.
Just really quick, something, oh, sorry to interrupt Dr. Mumford.
No.
some of the things I've seen on social media is, I believe that the Black community really has to, unfortunately for me to say this, be careful on what they play into, because there are a lot of jokes online that, like I mentioned earlier today, can be a sense of comfort for individuals in this community, but they also harm us when we play into these stereotypes, when we play into these jokes in these situations. When I was in middle school and the lights in the classroom would go off, I'd be like, oh, I'm like the darkest in here. Can anyone see me? Can anyone see me? And at the time, I didn't realize how harmful that was to me and to anyone that has the same skin tone as me. That's just not something I was aware of. And I think that a really big thing that we can push upon our youth is, even parents or teenagers, is we should just be careful into what we play into, because most of the time it can actually hurt us and prolong the viewpoint that a lot of people have on Black members already.
I'd just like to thank the committee for putting this together. Thank all the panel members for your great participation. You give me great hope for the future. Monica, Australyah, Alivia. I mean, you guys, I feel like things are in good hands. But Caitlin, I think you did an amazing job of putting this together. And I just like, and the people that are just here listening, thank you as well, because that's what it's going to take. People that are willing to listen to each other. So, thank you for a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. Like, this was very well put together. I really enjoy this. I love panels that are organized, but also allow us to have a good conversation, get it flowing, be able to bounce off of each other. I love it. I think one thing for my closing remark, more geared towards the youth, is just to remember, like I said, that you're very powerful. And I mean, like, if somebody would have told me like a superhero could be like an advocate, I would say like the youth are embodying that. Like they don't realize the change that they can make at such a young age. I mean, I was on a call with the senator the other day, and there was a 13-year-old girl on there making huge changes in LA, like advocating for homeless people. She was out there like clockwork. And just listening to the way that she spoke and listening to the changes that she's made at 13, like, was inspiring to me because she's so young and she took it upon herself to make those changes. So I think if that like inspires me, it would inspire so many people to see it come from a community this small. If they saw somebody from their community step up and speak up on behalf of this, and they're like, wow, they're making a change, they're passionate about what they're doing. They're doing it at such a young age. Like Alivia said, she's 19 and she sat in there in that meeting and did what she had to do. And I think that's important for people to realize, like, regardless of your age, when you speak, somebody's going to listen to you. And whether that's one person in the room, that one person is going to remember what you say and share that with 5 other people. 5 other people are going to hear what you say and share that with other people. Regardless of if they like what you have to say, they're still going to hear what you're saying. And I think that's something that I didn't realize, is that, when I came into a room and I spoke, even if it didn't look like they were listening, I knew they were listening. I knew that they were talking about it to their coworkers. I knew that, a change was going to come regardless of if they agreed or if they didn't agree. They were paying attention to me. I was in the meeting. I was talking. So I got here somehow. It takes time, but the youth, I mean, I can't stress it enough. Like, the youth are so powerful and they're just a big part of this movement. And I think once, like I said, once we realize that, the movement it's going to get going. And I think that these future generations they're going to make a change. They're going to make the change that we need to make.
Just for my closing remark, I would also like to thank you, Caitlin. Thank you for putting this on, and to all the panelists. Thank you so much for participating. There are a lot of new things that I didn't know that occurred on a daily basis. And so this was really refreshing to hear and really informative. Like Australyah said, the youth is the future. Like, the youth is the voice. You guys are empowering, we will get this done as a youth. And it is really inspiring when you see someone from your own community step up and stand for these changes. So my biggest message is talk, be loud, be proud, be bold, go after these things.
To amplify Black voices, I feel like that's very important as well. And as well as everyone else had talked about, the youth is super, super, super important. And even if you think that no one cares about what you have to say or no one's going to listen to you, I promise you someone cares. Someone wants you to speak up, and someone is going to help you no matter what. Someone cares about you.
And one more thing, like, I know we keep talking about the youth, but like, we can't forget that like it's never ever ever a bad time to be an ally. It's you're never too old, you're never too late in the game to get a foot in the movement, you know. Even if the planning process is already done, you can still come in there and bring something to the table. Like, you're never, there's not an age limit on when you can be an advocate, you know. There's not an age limit on being an ally. Whether you're 70 years old and you've seen everything go on and never decided to step up, you can step up when you're 70. If you're 13, like I said, and you want to make a change, you can make a change. So I think we need to remember, like, everybody can make a change. Anybody can make a change, but just the emphasis is on the youth right now because they're so powerful.
With all of that, we've officially finished our full discussion. And I want to thank all of you for wanting to participate in this, because what you bring to this community is something that neither I or any white person can, because you are the ones experiencing it. You are the ones handling it. You are the ones that have unfortunately had to deal with this oppression and this suppression and all of these things for many more years than I have been alive. And with that, I will let you all go and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.